Hello everybody, my name's Walter, and for today I have planned something special. Well, since it's my 100 subscriber special, that's no surprise, but if you have watched my other videos, you might recognize this world here from my slime door showcases, and that's what this subscriber special will be about. So I'm doing a little experiment here and doing something different than normal. And what I have planned for today is actually giving you a little insight of how I came up with my slime door designs, how I developed them, and well, how they do function. What might be of interest to some of you and might even give a few of you some ideas for your own builds. I'll also include a Word download in the description so you can actually copy parts of this world into your own. The only thing you have to remember is that some of the pistons might bug out, so you have to try and maybe have to debug it a bit. But nevertheless, let's start. So there were actually 3 different facts I had to learn about the piston and slime block mechanics before I could actually start with the development process of this door. So the first fact, a piston can only push 12 blocks. That's common knowledge. Also common knowledge nowadays is that the same applies to slime blocks. So in this case here, we have this piston here that sees 11 blocks and this piston here that sees 14 blocks. So if I power them, only this one here can extend. This one here has too many blocks and can't extend. The second thing I had to learn was that an immovable block doesn't count towards this limit. So even if I put a couple of obsidian here, it doesn't obstruct the slime blocks from working. So, and the final part was that a block that's just being moved counts for every other slime block in the vicinity as an immovable block. So what that means is, if I don't power those 2 pistons at the same time, but give this one here a 1 tick delay, what happens? As soon as I power the lever, this piston extends. 1 tick later, those blocks here are still moving and count as an immovable block for those slime blocks here. And now when 1 tick later this piston here gets powered, it sees, okay, I have this row of 6 blocks and this row of 5 blocks. Those here are immovable blocks, so I have only 11 blocks and I can extend 2. So what happens is this little sequence here. Of course, that was one of those ideas you get when you are in the middle of the night, in your bed, want to sleep. The next day being a really stressful one, and well, then you get one of those ideas and well, have to somehow write it down, which kinda shortens your sleep a bit, but I think it was worth it. Whatever. So the next thing I had to come up with was some way to use this to make a door. So what I came up with after a bit of experimenting was this kind of mechanic here. The problem I had was that those pistons were already working really close to their actual pushing limit, so more than a double piston extender wouldn't be feasible. So I had to use something different, and I went for a 2-level design. What I mean with a 2-level design is that the first level here are those pistons that push the door, the actual door here, and then a second level that would adjust those first level pistons. So how does this mechanic work? First, I give the first level a pulse. It's just a ghost block here, don't worry. So, and as you can see, what you would expect from sticky pistons that are given a one-tick pulse, they just push the blocks in front of them and don't rotate them, like this. Then what next happens is I have to adjust the second level. Then I can do the same again, and after 6 short pulses and 5 times adjusting, the door is closed completely, at least the bottom part. As you can see, the top part is pretty much the same. So what happens next if you want to open the door? I give it short pulses, then adjust the second level, short pulse, adjust, and so on. Again, it's 6 short pulses and 5 times adjusting. Come on. And now the door is opened. The last thing to do is evening out the floor and of course the ceiling. And for that I have those pistons with those line blocks here. So what happens is this block here gets pushed upwards 1. That means this block here also gets pushed 1 up in this position here. Then after a short pulse, you can see here those pistons retract again. This block here gets in its starting position, but this block here now is up here, and we have an even floor. This part in the next step I reworked a bit to make the whole mechanic a bit slimmer, as you might see here a bit. But nevertheless, this is how the mechanic works and how it was in the beginning. The next thing I had to figure out was how to actually power all of the circuits in the right sequence. And well, the biggest problem here was actually figuring out a way to power and depower the second level in the right sequence. So the first idea I tried out was some kind of repeater chain that would activate them in the right order, then by the use of an upper switch deactivate them in the reverse order. Unfortunately, that turned out to need a lot of resources and wasn't space efficient either. So I began experimenting a bit. At one point I tried out some hopper chains or filling a hopper with items and using the output from that. And that was actually the part where I decided to use something I saw in one of Xisuma's videos, which actually was invented by a guy named Daiko the Redstoner. And that is this little circuit here. It's an analog up and down counter. So what I mean is I have at this point a signal strength of 5. If I give it a short pulse in this part here, I count down 1 and have now only 4. And I can do this until I'm at 0. If I count upwards, I have just to give it a short pulse in the other half of it. And as you can see, it works quite reliably. It's pretty fast and pretty much the ideal thing to use when I want to power this little stair here. So I had now just to figure out a way or a circuit to give 6 pulses in this direction and 5 pulses in the right half of the up and down counter, so that the door would open and close in the right sequence and in the right timing. So For that, I decided I would make first a clock that would give out 5 pulses, and then by delaying the output of it by 1 cycle time of the clock, I would actually get an additional 6 pulse in this circuit here by leaving it at 5 pulses in the analog and up and down counter. So what I first used in my first designs, I reinvented this circuit more or less in the supercharged ones, but the first one I used was an EFO clock that would be controlled by a falling edge detector. So if the input signal would turn off, it would give the EFO clock the opportunity to cycle once. While the EFO clock would cycle, it would activate this clock here, which would then, during the cycle time of the EFO clock, give out exactly 5 pulses. Then I would take this pulse, would give it or direct it to the analog up and down counter and towards the level 1 pistons with a little extra delay bypass to make a 6 pulse, and then I just had to adjust the timing a bit, and that was pretty much all of the circuits with a little exception. I'll come to that soon. So this is the first design I came up with. It's 2 of those 6 block wide modules. This design has, as I already said, a module width of 6. The supercharged ones have modules of 2 block width. The reason for that is that these 6 blocks wide modules have an internal delay of 2 ticks, which means that you can't get this as fast as this one, even if you would supercharge it. It would always be at least 2 ticks slower per movement than this one here. Okay, now let's show you the circuit. Here, this is the falling edge detector, and here is the controlled EFO clock, which powers this clock here. You can see it a bit here. Then from here on, the output of this clock gets for once delayed by a cycle time and directly into the first layer, first level of the mechanic. So we have 6 pulses that are outputted from here, but also those pulses get directed to those redstone here, and in this case it gets to this block here, and from here on in this half of the up and down counter. Then if the door would be opened again at the moment, those 2 T flip-flops would be in the opposite state, so the power wouldn't get to this block here, but it would get over here to this half of the up and down counter, and the counter would count in the opposite direction. So the last part I haven't really talked about now is this T flip-flop here, which also uses the EFO clock as an input. So if the EFO clock has cycled once, the T flip-flop gets a short pulse, and those 2 get toggled, so that in the opening of the door the power only gets to this block here, and in the closing of the door it only gets to this block here. Then if the door opens, those blocks here get unpowered one after another. When the last one gets unpowered, this torch here turns on, and with this circuit here gives a short pulse into those pistons that are somehow a little hidden here, and move then those slime blocks here, and then just as they would do here, even out the floor, as you can see right now. So let's see, and here you get it. For the top part, I used the same main circuit. I just mirrored it. Then I had to invert the output signals, because now the deactivation sequence would start from the top one and not from the bottom one. And of course I had to take an output to those pistons here, give them a short pulse when this block here would, this torch here would unpower. So when this block here gets powered, it gives a short pulse to those pistons. Okay, so that was how the first modules or the first versions of my doors worked. What I did then was actually trying it out if it could get a bit bigger, and well, as you can see, it works. Well, it works now, but this was actually the point where I first encountered those piston bugs. As you can see here, in this case it even was the last module. Okay, here, as you can see here, it was the first module, the very first module that bugged out. So the door didn't respond at all, and it took me some time to figure out what the problem was. So if you have a piston bug in the first module, well, the door doesn't move at all. Well, what I had to do at this point was figuring out how to actually solve it. So I came up with this second design here, with this zigzag structure here, and found out that this also doesn't work all the time. So I figured out I have to test each and every of my doors in each and every situation, and have to, well, try out and debug it by hand while building it. So the next thing I wanted to do was to make it a bit faster, because well, as you can see here, it's not the fastest one, at least if you compare it to the supercharged ones, which are really fast in comparison. So well, as you can see, my graphic card isn't the newest one, so it kinda gets a bit glitchy now and then. Okay, nevertheless, I had to redesign the modules a bit, and what I came up with was those little modules you can already see in my tutorials. Yeah, for this one here I still use the same main circuit as I already did, just modified it a bit and modified the clock a bit. As you can see, it's a bit faster, but it's not supercharged yet. And as you can see, I didn't build a upper part, so ghost blocks again. It stayed as well, a fence gate or a movable wall. But this was the point where I decided I had to rework the whole main circuits for it to be supercharged. So the next thing I did was actually making a few experiments to figure out the right timing, and what I came up with was that the level 1 pistons need exactly 3 ticks for their action, so 2 ticks for the extending and 1 tick for the retracting. It doesn't matter if it is while the door opens or while the door closes. And the second one I made sure of with those experiments was that the second layer or the second level of the mechanic needs in the opening of the door exactly 1 tick and in the closing 2 ticks. That's just the normal piston timing, but what that means is that we have actually 2 different cycle times if we want to supercharge the mechanic, and that is while the door opens we have a cycle time of 4 ticks, and while it closes we have 5 ticks. So I had yet again a decision to make. The decision was whether I would use 2 different clocks and switch between those 2 clocks, or to use a clock that can be switched between 2 cycle times. And that was what I used later on, because that would be more resource friendly and also wouldn't need as much space. So what I came up with after a bit of experimenting was this kind of clock here. So at the moment in this state it has a cycle time of 4 ticks, as you can see here. Then if you place a block here, it goes up to a cycle time of 5, as you can see here. So now how does this work? Well, in this state it's just a normal even clock, meaning we have a delay of 1 tick in the comparator here and another delay of 1 tick here. So it stays on for 2 ticks, then the signal reaches this block here, then it turns on off the comparator, then the negative signal stays for 2 ticks, and the same thing repeats again. And what happens if I put a block here is that the on state gets extended by 1 tick. So it turns on at the same time as it would without this block here, but it turns off 1 tick later as it would. So I get a on signal. Here I get an on signal of 3 ticks and an off signal of 2 ticks. Because it's inverted by the comparator here, the output of the clock here is 2 ticks on and 3 ticks off. And of course you can easily toggle the clock between the on and the off state just by powering this little comparator here. Now the next thing I had to figure out was a way to turn off the clock after exactly 5 pulses, because yet again we are going for 5 pulses and then we would just extend the last pulse or the pulses by a cycle time to get us a 6 pulse, and just the same as we already did before. So what I used here is a pulse multiplier I designed a few months ago. I soon make a tutorial about this, so I'm not going into much of the details now. Just one thing, as you can see here, it gives 5 pulses here. Then after those 5 pulses are given, we have yet again a few T flip-flops that redirect the power to the right states and all to the right halves of the up and down counter, which is in this case not implemented in this circuit here, but it would be down a layer here. Well, nevertheless, I would also add a T flip-flop for the clock, so it would also switch between the 4 cycle and the 5 cycle time each time I give this circuit a pulse. I made two different designs for the main circuits, one for the bottom part and one for the top part. The reason for that is the changed layouts of the modules and the changed layout of the timings and the clocks. So I first built the modules, then I went to the site and built those circuits, and finally I did my best to combine those two parts, and I think I made a pretty good work there, if you can see here. And that was how the 11 block high supercharged and infinitely expandable slime door design was invented. Okay, a few days later, after I came up with this door here, it was yet again while I was trying to sleep, I found a way to make my 11 block high door a 12 block high. So what I remembered then was that if an upwards facing piston and a downwards facing sticky piston are fighting over a block, like here, the bottom one, the upwards facing one, always wins. So what this means is that I can actually build something like this and make it work. So how does this work, or where's the problem with this? Okay, now as I said at the beginning of my video, those two modules, or each of those modules, have to be activated and deactivated with a 1 tick delay. So that means that I can't move those modules, like first I retract this module, then I retract this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. But I have to move one of the bottom and one of the top modules at the same time. So if I go from this bottom module here, it's either this one here on the top or this one here on the top that moves at the same time. So what would be if this module here and this module would move at the same time? Well, first the bottom piston here would count how many blocks it sees, and in this case it has its 6 slime blocks, those 6 normal blocks, and this normal block here. So it's a total of 13 blocks, and well, it can't pull this one, and it stays like this. Then after that, this top piston here would count how many blocks it sees, and in this case it's only 12 blocks, so those 12 blocks would be retracted, and well, as this would stay, all of the following modules would see 13 blocks, and the door would only open the first module, top module here. So now what happens if those two modules move at the same time? Well, 1 tick before, this module here retracts. There's no problem with that. Then those two modules get depowered, and what happens now is, first this piston here counts its blocks. So it counts 12 blocks, thinks okay, that's fine, those 12 blocks are reserved for me, and no one else can pull them or push them. So then this piston here counts its blocks, and in this case it counts those 6 slime blocks, those normal blocks here, and this block here is already counted towards this bottom one piston here, so it's also only at 12 blocks, and it can retract 2. And then a tick later those two modules retract, and so on and so on. And this can be extended as long as you want. So using this concept, I was able to modify my door to make a 12 block high design. What I had to do was modifying the end of each module. Then I had to mirror the top half of the door, because now instead of the bottom one and the top one starting their sequence from different sides, now I had to start at the same side of the door and go to the other side in a sequence. And another thing I had to modify was that now those pistons that would even out the floor aren't needed anymore. So I could leave them away, and so the design actually got a bit cheaper resource-wise and a bit easier to build, if you ask me. The only things I kinda regret a bit with this one is that it's not a rectangle anymore, and if you want to move through it, you have to actually go above some slime blocks, so you are slowed down a bit. Something that wouldn't happen if you use the 11 block high design. But nevertheless, that's how the 12 block high design works. Okay, so the next logical step was flipping this 12 block high design and making a 12 block wide floor or ceiling. And for that there were two possibilities, as you can see here. One that's almost flat on the ceiling and one that's almost flat on the floor level of it. For those two designs I used the same main circuits. They are just modified at a few points, but that's nothing that really is worth mentioning. The main difference are the modules. Since the powering of the first layer or first level of the mechanic now is implemented by those repeater chains here that are in this case powering those second level slime blocks here, which is also the reason those two designs need a lot of repeaters more than the door designs. In this version here, the power is transmitted via these floor blocks, but the principle is pretty much the same. And as you can see, the working principle is exactly the same if you compare it with the door. The only thing you have to make sure is the direction you're building those two floors, because whether those two blocks, those two modules here or those two modules have to be activated at the same time kinda depends on the direction you're building your whole floor. Okay, so that was a brief summary of how I came up with my slime door and slime floor designs. I hope you enjoyed this 100 subscriber special, and well, see ya.